He turned water into wine, I turned whiskey into songs. Too many second chances, too many too far gones. Gave me grace along the way, took my heart and led me home. Don't you see, it's a God thing for me. Now I write songs about the heartland. My heartland's in Tennessee.
Welcome to the Heartland Journal podcast with Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community and lovers of the truth. Today, we are talking with special guest Mike Smith. Mike Smith, former homeless veteran, shares his true life story of redemption. Thank you for your service, sir. He's heard it said that any life worth living is one worth recording. His life has been filled with manic highs, severe depression, and a few suicide attempts. He was arrested several times and imprisoned, flying high from mania. He was kicked out of the military for drug abuse, only to return back home where everyone hated him. He knows what it's like firsthand to have nothing, only for the entire world to turn their backs. He spent a lot of time in psych wards, treatment centers, and homeless shelters, 3 days in a padded cell where he experienced hell on earth. He had civil commitments placed on him in 2 states. He was sick for decades. Now, there's a balance in his medication, and his severe alcohol abuse is in recovery. This is a miracle, as you will see throughout this story about all the mania, suicide attempts, and severe alcoholism. But don't worry, it is an optimistic story. He quotes Mark Twain, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you understand why. You're about to understand why. He also quotes Matthew 28:16 through 20. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." That, folks, is the Great Commission. Let's hear Mike Smith, how he incorporates that into his daily life. He is the gritty, no-frills voice behind the gutter gospel, a raw and powerful memoir that dives headfirst into the trenches of addiction, redemption, and self-discovery. Wow, can't wait. Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful, Steve. I thank you for having me on your show today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First, as always on the show, thank you for your Air Force service. Tell us why you quote Matthew 28:16 on your website.
Well, it's just about what I'm trying to convey to people, I guess, is beyond that verse, what I'm thinking of putting on there to switch it with is really Revelations 12:11, which says, "We've overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony." And there's so much power in people's testimony and stories. Mine just happens to be kind of the extreme of, where my journey had gone in my life over the course of my entire 61 years so far on the planet. So I can dive into that here in a little bit, but so much has happened in my life that I would really like to share with your audience, starting from childhood, growing up in Sauk Center, Minnesota. We lived there. My dad managed a JCPenney clothing store chain. He was the store manager for that outfit. This is going back into like the late 60s and early to mid 70s. Okay, that's when we were in Sauk Center. There's 5 kids. I'm the second youngest. And, growing up in Sauk was a great time. It was a great childhood. I had nothing but good things to say and great memories from Sauk Center, except that when when I was 12 years old, my dad lost his job as the manager at the JCPenney store. And we were out of options. They had some money saved. So my dad's dream was always to open up his own clothing store. So he moved the family out of Sauk Center when I was 12 years of age up to a little town outside of Fargo by a half hour that no one's ever heard of called Barnesville, Minnesota. So anyway, now we're new into that time in Barnesville, and I just had started high school the following half year that we moved over the Christmas break of 76 and 77. And so I spent a half year in the Catholic grade school and, and then went into the public school the following year and really took off into drugs and alcohol at a very early age.
Hmm.
I had one friend in high school by the name of John Hanson. He introduced me to that. And John had a childhood that was starting to mirror a lot of mine when we're talking about difficulty adjusting to a new town and not many friends except him. Later in life, John, I found out he had joined the Army and I joined the Air Force after high school. But anyway, John took his own life and he became another casualty of something I'm an advocate for, which is mental health.
Hmm.
And especially among veterans, the suicide rate is so high. But, going back now to that time, my dad passed away at 15. So only 3 years into that move, we lost the house to the bank, we lost a clothing store to the bank, and we lost everything, which is how I ended up in the military. I did try college for 1 year prior to going in the Air Force, but flunked out of that pretty fast. So now I had student loans to pay and the rest of it. So that kind of fills in a pretty brief synopsis of what my childhood growing up was like and getting into the military days. I was in the military for just short of 2.5 years when I was caught getting back into the routine of smoking marijuana. So that was during the Ronald Reagan and Nancy had her war on drugs back in their administration. So they had zero tolerance for marijuana. And now it's almost laughable to look back on it and see, the laws that have been changed and how prevalent marijuana is in our society these
I was just
days.
reading about a boy in the ER that died from one hit on a vape. It had Fenty in it. No way to
Yeah.
know what's in the cartridge of a vape, I guess. About the size of a pencil lead tip. It's different
Yeah.
out there these days than when you had your issues, huh?
Oh, totally different. And I hope we can get the press release link posted um, on this meeting later because I this is jumping ahead a little bit, but after all my life's trials, being a homeless veteran, being civil commitments in 2 states, being in jail, being institutionalized for 6 weeks in the state hospital, and on and on and on. So much of my life was covered by manic breaks. My first one happened in 1988, and that one was so terrifying. It's on the sample chapters on my website, theguttergospel.com. You'll see not only that manic break, which I call Catch My Fall, and that one was so intense. I saw my dad, who had been passed away for 8 years by this point. So, summer of 88, he died in 80. And, you know, it was so horrible to experience. But anyway, if you read that sample chapter up there, the first one on my website, where you can see the tab that says sample chapters, you can read not only that one, but one even worse. Terrifying was that. 11 years forwarding to 1999 over Thanksgiving break, I had a manic cycle to where I actually toured hell for 3 straight days in a padded cell bound by a straitjacket, and my life became so unmanageable after that. I had a great job at the transit system. I was the manager overseeing 25 employees, so I had a lot of responsibility. But it picks up in that sample chapter, and it's all in the book, obviously. But it's talking about mental health, and that is in the press release. That's really now it's a global crisis. that we're facing with mental health. It is every family has a member or knows somebody that has a mirrored life of what my life touched on throughout their history. They know of either a family member or a friend, or it affects every person on the planet
It
that
does.
knows. Yeah.
So the Gutter Gospel, The Road to Redemption, is on Kindle for folks. How hard was it to write it for you? You sound very open and you can communicate this. A lot of veterans and former drug addicts I know, they don't really like to talk about it. How hard was it to write?
Well, I journaled for over 30 years to answer your question. So it took a lot of time because my only solace, Steve, when I was going through the psych units and all this other stuff was I always was journaling for some reason. God used it, now later in my life. I didn't understand at the time why I was writing. It just that happened that we got all of the journaling put together in a book and got published in Brooklyn Publishers out in New York beginning of 2025. That's when I started doing podcast guest experiences or appearances as well. Because what happened leading up to the publication right before 2025 started, I lost my best friend to cancer, Brad Witzke, 2 weeks prior to the beginning of 2025, and watched him really die in front of me
Wow.
from he had cancer very severely. So lost Brad. I'm part of the jail chaplain ministries, and that's how I met Brad here in Fargo. So what a great guy. But getting back to the journaling, getting published, you know, it's been a blessing ever since because after that, like I said, I started to do podcast appearances. And now my shows have actually reached over 200 countries and 5 continents so far in a year and still growing. So,
You mentioned your dad, and you had a vision of your dad, but you didn't say, and I read he demanded you kill yourself in that
yeah,
meeting. What kind of father was he? Was that like out of character for dad, or was you like, oh, that guy again? Like, what was your relationship with your dad?
it was kind of a love-hate relationship, to be honest with you. My dad, we would go fishing a lot when we moved up to Barnesville out in Maplewood State Park, and that was our bonding time. He was asking, why am I involved in my life choices that I was getting involved in so at an early age, and so we would have those talks, but at the same time, he was stern too, but um, I don't think he was, out of character. For him was what happened in 88. That was not my dad. That was a demonic attack is what that
Ah, that's
was.
what I thought you might say. Okay. So your book talks about moments that turned your life around. What was like the moment that turned your life around?
Well, living in my second homeless shelter, you know now we're past all of the mania and all the other stuff after living now in my second homeless shelter. Just to give you guys an idea, there was veterans upstairs in this two-story facility, and there was people transitioning out of jail on the bottom level, and we would eat all of our meals together. So went down for lunch and got back up to my room, and a lady that worked at that facility came in and she said, Mike, you have some mail today. And I thought, man, who would be mailing me after, everybody in my life had given up on me, everybody, including my wife. And so long story short, there was two big checks in there for 100% service connection disability from the VA after living off of nothing for years, just doing odd jobs because I couldn't cope after that padded cell experience. So that turned my life around on the positive path for good, to where I could just journal about it and wrap it all up into a project that now had reached as many people as it has. And we're in the works now to actually get my story turned into a true life movie. I'm working with people out in Hollywood. There's a gentleman that's helping me there. I'm an ICVM member, and so is he. by the name of Ian Irie that produced and directed the Hunger Games. He's a big help to me just as a consultant on the project. He introduced me to his team of people he's worked with in the past out there. So we're working together now to get it started. I have a TV appearance coming up this Monday with the North Dakota Today show, and that's going to be 9 a.m. Fargo time. So going out to the studios to talk about my movie project being filmed all up here in the Fargo Moorhead community, and so that's in my wheelhouse right now. I did also just get a notification after my press release went out that I'm going to be featured in a full page um, ad or article on USA Today, and that reaches over 150 million people on their every edition of their
Oh, that'll
uh,
be amazing.
magazine. So
So the gutter gospel, it's such a vivid, almost oxymoronic title that immediately grabs attention. Did mine. When you were living through homelessness and addiction, did you already see those experiences as carrying a kind of gospel or sacred lesson, or was that perspective something that only emerged in hindsight during your recovery?
yeah, the way I came up with the gutter gospel, you see in one of the very earliest chapters, I talk about the first time I ever got intoxicated. I fell down face first in the gutter and was bleeding all over the gutter. So that's how the gutter got established in all the places that I had lived in, like we've just covered here. Um, that's really what grabs everybody's attention because it's so relatable. Not only is the mental health crisis relatable, but so is the gutter gospel because everybody had to go through their trials in life ever since the fall of mankind. That's just all something we all face. So it's very relatable from that vantage point as well. That people can say, you know what, Mike's gone through so much, man. I got to get that book to
Yeah.
see it and read
Yeah, yeah, the
it.
details are what matters. Yeah. So you dedicated it to your wife, Susan. That's very moving, that part. You call her both grace and salvation. There must be your second wife, because I think you said earlier on that you lost your wife unless she was reconciled. Tell us. But most relationships don't survive decades of mental illness, addiction, and homelessness. What did Susan see in you during your darkest moments and she held on to? And what would you want partners of people struggling with addiction to understand from your stories, you and her
Man,
story?
that's a terrific question, Steve. Uh, to answer the first part of it, we are still together. We did reconcile,
Amen.
and so we've been married. This coming May, it'll be 37 years.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
that's a miracle in and of itself. But when I was going through all the mania, she financially separated from me because she said, "You're so reckless with your spending that I got to protect my assets, instead of having us all on one account." So that happened. And then when I was really cycling severely, trying to get out of St. Cloud in my first homeless shelter and come back to Fargo, she was saying, "You cannot come back into the household because we need you to have your medications balanced," which thankfully they are now. I'm working with a very talented doctor up at the VA, and I'm feeling very fortunate and blessed to have him in my life. Dr. Hayter is his name. Great guy. We visit all the time. And but to answer the other part of the question, what I would say to families struggling with mental illness is please seek out help because the alternative is, and this is what so many people wind up doing, is just checking out because the struggle is so severe. That's why we see record high suicide rates and all this other stuff. I just am trying to do my part as big as I can. That's why I did the global press release was to say, and it hit PR Newswire, which is the biggest. So that there's hope still. There's a chapter in my book called Sea of Tears that I'd encourage you to read. I can send you over a free copy of that, where Jesus appeared to me in a dream one night. And the parable of the muddy penny is that in the Sea of Tears, is that everybody can relate to feeling in today's world no more valued, than a worthless, muddy penny when they look in the mirror, because that's what they see with all the difficulties today's world includes in it to try and survive and live in it, and maybe just try and save some money to take a vacation or whatever. The struggle is so severe that only, a handful of people have it financially set. The rest of everybody else is out there slaving away every day just to make it through to another week. Now I'm a full time, I haven't mentioned this yet, I'm a full time fundraiser through my books sales and my donations on my website as well. That I do give money to our local food champ chapter called Seeds of Hope. And I'm really good friends with those guys. They happen to be real solid believers. And Blair and Jody Hill run it. And I'm proud to call them good friends
Nice.
that I believe in their ministry 100%.
Very nice. You served in the Air Force, but you didn't see combat, yet you describe experiencing your own inner war. The veteran suicide rate is devastating. You mentioned it, it's true. How do you think the military community and society at large could better serve veterans that, with the wounds you can't see, but are just as fatal as you described? Is the VA doing any good?
Yeah, I believe they are. Those numbers are starting to come down. I only have one brother. His name is Pat, my older brother, and he said, Mike, when you're saying on your shows 22 veterans per day commit suicide, you should make sure you get your numbers right because now it's 17.6. So if you Google it, last time I Googled it about 2, 3 months ago, that's what the rate was. So there is there's either some progress being made or not as many veterans around to take their own life after everybody, so many have, like my friend John Hanson. So one or the other is true, but I want to see the number become as low as it can be. So that's why I'm such an advocate for it, both in every media appearance I do. It's in the article in the USA Today. It's going to be on the TV show I'm doing, and everything else is saying, please love on these people because they are struggling severely, and they need somebody to come along beside them and really love on them. And that's what the Muddy Pennies Sea of Tears chapter talks about, is that God put you on this planet to love that one person unconditionally, like I did with Brad. I spoiled him rotten with my disability checks. We'd go fishing together, jet skiing, all this stuff, and like I said, we became very close, which was devastating when I lost him. But the whole book really talks about mental health and the journey when people are struggling, and it flows so nicely because when my brother saw the first draft of my book, he said, Mike, this thing reads like a riding lawnmower repair manual or something. You need a ghostwriter. So I hired Brooklyn Publishers, like I said, and then they did a fantastic job cleaning it up,
Well,
taking the rough writing into the finished product.
that's good. Yeah, the book is described as decades of journaling coming together. So for someone who went through psych wards, jail cells, and treatment centers, and still writing, did you ever write during your darkest moments, expecting anyone else
Yeah.
to ever read it? And did you ever look at it and go like, "Oh my gosh, I can't say that out loud"?
Well, it's to answer that question, it's yes, I was journaling the entire time for over 30 years in those dark holes because there was, even when there wasn't anything to write with, there were the thoughts that came with it and the stories that came with it from being uh, from just lived experiences through the hard times. And it was something that I can look back now and laugh about and cry about with these podcast hosts like yourself and say, unbelievable story. It's just amazing that Mike is still alive after everything he went through. I'm a two-time suicide survivor, and on and on and on. That's why I'm such an advocate for the suicide prevention
You
as
just
well.
talked about yourself in the third person by saying, Mike. Do you ever look at it like a guy that you used to know? Is that sort of how
Yeah,
you're
that's
getting through?
yeah,
It's
that's
not
kind of
Mike
what
Smith
I'm.
today, it's Mike Smith from those dark days.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That's why it's kind of talking the third person sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. You write about accepting Jesus Christ in 1988, yet your journey included years of continuing struggle after that. How did you explain to people who think faith should be an instant fix that your spiritual transformation was real even while you were still falling back into addiction and homelessness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I can really even find a way to answer it. I just looked at it like,
Would you say
you
born
know,
again twice, maybe?
yeah, born again and rebirth, recommitment to your life to Christ, you know. And now I'm very involved in all the men's groups up here. I'm in a men's group meeting every day of the week
Mm.
through the jail chaplains or my Northview Saturday morning groups or then church on Sunday. You know, I've got every day covered with something faith based, including reading out of the Life Recovery Bible. That's what we really focus on at the jail chaplains a lot. And I'm friends with so many guys that are coming out of incarceration. There's a great program here, faith based, called Project Genesis, that they go into after being out of jail and really seeking to stay on their spiritual journey. And I'm a facilitator for those groups as well, to be able to say, hey, look, this is my story. And I'm always witnessing to people and say, you know, don't give up because the dark days pass, you
Yeah,
know.
men's encouragement groups are so important. I always think of the soldiers who came home from Vietnam and they were immediately treated so terribly. And it's mostly because either their best friends died or they lived on the other side of the country. And so they weren't spending time together. But if they had known what you found out, these men's encouragement groups can encourage and keep you intact, I believe suicide would be much smaller. And especially if Jesus Christ is in the center. Now, you have chapter 6. Such a provocative title, Church Satan, Blood for Booze. It suggests a collision of sacred and profane, obviously, like gutter gospel. Can you talk about that chapter specifically and how institutional religion both helped and failed you during your journey? Did you ever feel like an outcast inside church walls for all you'd done?
Yes, very much so. And the way I came up with that chapter was for Easter drama right after Susan and I, my wife, were married. 1 year after that, we had been attending this great big First Assembly of God Church in South Fargo, and so we're in church one Sunday morning, and they were trying to get a cast together for the Easter Passion play. So they were, obviously showing the crucifixion and everything that led up to the crucifixion and the resurrection, and a scene where they tour in hell, Jesus does. And they didn't have anybody to play the role of Satan. So I was typecast when I volunteered, since I can't sing a lick. Every other person had to sing. Uh, but I'm like 6'5". So I thought, well, the pastor that was heading it all up said, Pastor Bruce, he said, Mike, you'd be perfect to play that role. So I thought, okay, I'll do it and try it 1 year. And then I found, was wound up typecast. So I did it 3 years in a row. But after the third year, I started to question God and started to question my journey and everything else. I don't know if it was because I played that role and didn't have enough prayer or what, but I started drinking again after 3 years of being involved heavily in the church and teaching small groups and all this other stuff. And it was like, yeah, I don't know if it was that the church failed me or I failed the church, but that was how I came up with that chapter.
Okay. As a two-time suicide survivor writing about the suicide solution in chapter 8, what was different about the moment you chose to survive? Like, was there a
Yeah,
specific breaking point or a specific
yeah,
lifeline that pulled you back from that ledge the second
yes.
time?
Yes, that's a great question. And yes,
I love
what
hearing that,
happened
by the way.
was I was driving a taxi cab at night, driving all the drunks around, and of course they'd tease me and make fun of me and say, stuff like, "What's the matter, loser? Can't you get a real job?" and all this other stuff. And I was feeling so discouraged that I just said, I went home that night. I started stringing myself up in the basement of our house with an electrical cord, and So what became that was just as I was about to kick the stool out, there was a still quiet voice that said, "Mike, your life still has a purpose." And that stopped me from actually taking my own life. It was hearing directly from God, just in a very non-threatening, just calming way, saying, "Mike, your life still has a purpose." And that's what I would share with everybody listening to this show. Their life still has a purpose.
And you believed it. That's the hard part too, is to actually believe it. You were diagnosed with bipolar disorder and spent time
Yeah.
in padded cells, like you said, and civil commitments, I think 2 states. Do you think someone with your exact symptoms would be treated differently today than you were decades ago now? And have we actually gotten better at handling mental health crises, or do you see the same pattern
Yes.
repeating? Not necessarily the VA, you talked about that, but in the broader public.
Yeah. I think that ever since fentanyl that you talked about earlier was pouring into our borders, the mental health crisis has gone sky high and off the charts, like we discussed earlier. But I do believe that we can do better with just loving on somebody that God brings across our path as much as possible and say, "Look, I'm not perfect. I've got all my flaws and sins and all this other stuff piled up that I even wrote about, or maybe you haven't wrote about your struggles, but I would encourage people to do that and just encourage them and say, you know what, your life matters to me, at least. I consider you a dear friend, so open up to me what's going on in your head. And there's a saying that I like to quote all the time that the ex secretary education secretary under Ronald Reagan, Bill Bennett, was quoted as saying that every sinner has a future and every saint has a past, and that's very accurate. When you look at life in that lens, that no one's perfect ever since the fall of mankind, like I said. So, you know be honest and open with that person that is struggling, and that, I think, is the best remedy.
How did the country treat you as a veteran? I mentioned Vietnam, but that wasn't your experience coming home from a war like that that was so divisive here in America. How did they
So,
treat you when you got home?
very poorly. It was hard to find work with that, being kicked out for drug abuse. That's what it says on my DD 214. It says medical under honorable, but then drug abuse on the bottom line. So, every time you go to fill out an application somewhere and say, "Oh, well, I was in the military," you got to provide that DD 24. At least back in my day, you did. And and if they read that, they're like, "I don't want to hire someone like this." So I had to work removing asbestos and all kinds of odd hard labor jobs. That's why I have such bad back problems now that I'm 61, is because of all the
Mhm.
manual labor that I had to do just to survive back, transitioning out of my post-military days before I got into like management and sales and all this other stuff. So, but it's an interesting journey to read about, and it was interesting to live it and journal about it.
Yeah.
But now, look, I would encourage people to
Did the
look at my
VA
life.
have resources for you to transition from, Air Forceman to
They
journalist
might,
or author? Anything like, do they have an artistic side to the VA besides just here, go take these painkillers and see you in a year?
yeah, basically, I didn't seek it out if they did.
Oh.
I didn't have that. I didn't have anybody really helping me,
Well, then
you know.
you self-diagnosed yourself that writing was cathartic.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, very much so. I had an aunt that passed away a few years ago that lived in New York, and she was a doctor, and so was her husband. She was a chronic alcoholic, but was still able to, function as being a doctor. But anyway, when she would visit up here, I was showing her some of the stuff I was writing. So this is many years ago. And she said, "Well, Mike, I got my book published. I would encourage you to continue to write." So that's really the motivation behind journaling for all those 30 some years, was my Aunt Jean encouraging me to do so.
Very nice. Okay. And did she grow up with you when you were moving from place to place? Like, was she
Well, they
like your
lived
big
in New York.
sister?
they lived in New York City, so we didn't get
So
to see
no.
him that often. But when we did, later in life, she came to visit my mom that was passing away with cancer a lot. So that's
Mm.
this is in 2009. So when I was seeing Jean then, she was saying, "I love the way you write. You know, even though it's got rough edges to it, it's very raw and very true." So, knowing me, knowing what I was going through, because she had a son that was a drug addict and with her own drinking issues as well. So she loved my stuff. So, if I can write and affect people, that's the goal, is to say, that's the bottom line for anybody, is just they want a lifeline in today's world.
Did you take inspiration from any writers, either journalism or authors of books?
And no, I just picked up on it and loved it. I loved playing sports, but I had a bad accident about 7 years ago now that blew out my right deltoid. So I have to do typing very slowly with my offhand, and it's hard to write, but I still enjoy writing after, the book got published. It's just cathartic for me. So I continue to write. I don't know if I'm ever going to show it to somebody, but my main goal was just to journal my thoughts. I never dreamed that it was going to be a published book one day. So that was just my own journey with it.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. So, one more time about the parable of the muddy gutter penny. I do find it to be very illustrious of a chapter for the entire book, although everyone should read every word of all of the chapters. But it is a fascinating title. Was there a specific memory or moment that inspired that chapter and that metaphor that you could flesh out for us? I know you briefed on it, but what does the muddy gutter penny represent to you now?
Loving on one person, and that's what we talked about, during this show today, is that God places people in your life uh, for a reason. You know, you've shared your own life experiences with them. And this is why I can say that to you. There's this good friend of mine from my small men's group who has a nephew that just lost his parents both in a car accident several years ago, but then his aunt was taking care of him and she just passed away 2 weeks ago, and he's 15. So just like when I was losing my dad at that age. So my friend Ron from our men's group brought him up here, and the three of us went out to breakfast. And I was sharing my journey with him about how it's getting turned into a movie and all the rest of this. And he was listening very intently. So then, now he's interested in coming to see me and talk to me more. So God designs all this, knowing in advance that your pain's going to be used for somebody else's gain and love in the future. That's the way you got to view it.
Why do you think so many kids today, 8 to 14, are all of a sudden becoming suicide statistics? That was not a thing. I grew up in the 70s. What do you
Yeah,
think is happening so far down the age gap that this is now it's actually a pandemic?
yeah.
It's happening a lot. They're not
It's
veterans, you know.
Yeah, it's a combination of so many things. They're getting into the drugs, they're getting into social media too much, they're getting where they're bullied or whatever. They're all those things that you just mentioned when we were growing up, we didn't have. We didn't hear of something called fentanyl. We didn't hear of something called Facebook. We didn't know what it was like to be constantly bombarded on social media with peer pressure and all this other stuff. You hear so many stories about that, and kids saying, "Oh, well," they read later that they were getting hammered at on social media somehow, and that's what forced them to take their own life at an early age. So there's so many variables to it that we never even would have dreamed of as growing up when we did.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned you were into sports. The sports today, these kids get injured, they get a lifetime of OxyContin, and that is a narcotic that they
Gateway.
would lead to very dark thoughts. And I could see where they could say the pain will never end. It's hopelessness. They
Yes.
need Jesus just as bad as the rest of us. If someone listening to this podcast is actively struggling with addiction, homelessness, if they have a phone and they can listen to it, or suicidal thoughts right now, not reading your book, not in recovery, just drowning, what do you say to them?
I say reach out to me personally on my business email, and I will personally take the time to help each one individual that God is talking to directly, listening to this show. I will give you that email right now on air, okay,
Go for
which
it.
is Mike at theguttergospel.com. That's my main email, which you know because you've reached out to me on there a couple times.
The
Thank
Zoom
you for
is on there right now.
Thank you for that. Yep. Okay. So Mike at theguttergospel.com, and I'll hook them up
Great.
with the same things I do, the men's groups or women's groups or youth groups or, suicide prevention lines that are up and going 24/7. International prayer line. My buddy Pastor Bob runs that out in Virginia, but there's all kinds of prayer lines. The Billy Graham people have one up where you can get prayer all the time, 24/7, 365. So all those is what I will direct them to. And if they're comfortable giving me their number, I will call them on their phone and just talk to them and love on them as long as it takes. Because I'm 100% retired military with my VA benefits. So I got nothing but time on my hands to help them.
And why is writing this book, someone who thought of themselves worth less than a muddy penny, putting your shame on paper for strangers, really, why is it worth it if it reaches even one of those people?
I look at it this way, Steve. Can you think of a more meaningful way to spend your life than reaching one soul for the kingdom of God, to have them not have to eternally suffer what I did 3 days in that padded cell? There's that parable of the rich man and Lazarus in chapter 16 of Luke, where that rich man is begging somebody to be brought back from hell to warn his brothers so that they do not wind up with him. It's that horrifying. And that's what I experienced for 3 straight days in that padded cell. Unimaginable. I'll share one last thing about that time in there. Right when I was coming out of it, a couple days later, I was chained to my bed, and this nurse comes in and she said, "Mike, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Miss Amy. I'm your nurse today, and I would like to share this with you. When you were coming out of that state in that padded cell," she said, "I saw you in there." And you look so scared and terrified. You look like a cornered, scared animal out of your mind. You were just that terrified. So that's the experience of what that was like that I write about.
And that makes sense. Matthew 28:20. And surely I am with you always to the very end. That's the Great Commission. That's what you're doing.
Yes. Yes, sir. Well said, Steve.
All right. Well, then you'll get that answer when you get to heaven and say, thank you, good and faithful servant. Welcome home. Mike, I want to thank you for being honest and sharing your life story with us. I'm actually quite honored that you would take the time to do it here on this show. Um, uh, Tell our listeners where they can go to. You gave us our email. I'll put it in show notes, but tell us where they can go to find out more about you and maybe social media.
Yeah, we've got my website set up to you can buy a copy of the book for $9.97. Scroll down on the bottom of the homepage. We also have a donate now tab. If you want to support my ministry, you can feel free to donate there. You can reach me on my personal business email that I just gave out. We're on Instagram at mike.guttergospel, so I can have all those social media up there. I have a YouTube channel where it's all just the Gutter Gospel all together. That will pop up quite a few samples of the podcast shows I've done. I would encourage somebody to look at the one I like to send out that I did about a year ago with a buddy of mine that's a veteran also out in Virginia. And he read the book before he interviewed me, just like you did. And that's why I really thank you for doing that. And that one was called Digging Up the Underground. It's the one with the orange background. When you go to my YouTube channel, you can see it there because it gets in deep about, I get very emotional a few times, and so does he, when we're sharing what I did today with you, Steve, and your audience. He was really, did a great job. So I'm always thankful to the hosts of the shows that invite me on. So I'm very thankful that Melissa introduced me to you, and we were able to get together today.
Yeah,
So
you have a big heart. I think that's amazing, and I wish you Godspeed on all your journeys that you're going to have going forward. And now, with fame, will come a lot of issues and temptations. So just stay on the path. You're doing a great job. So thanks again for coming on with us, and maybe we'll have you back again when you've hit the big time when your movie comes out, type of thing.
oh, that'd be terrific if we could do that. We're hoping to film this summer and get it out by probably, I don't know, I've never done a movie, but I
Yeah.
don't know how long it'll take to get it all together and get it out there. But
Is there an
I'm
actor
really
attached to
excited
it that
about
we
it.
know?
What's that?
Is
An
there an
actor?
yeah?
You
Is there
know who
one?
I'm shooting for? Because he's a North Dakota guy, is Josh DeMille, or however you pronounce his name, that was in Transformers and some of those other big movies.
Sure, I could
Uh,
see it. I could see it.
he lives in Fargo Moorhead now. He's from Minot, North Dakota, but he hit the big time in Hollywood. I think he'd do a great job with the movie. So we just got to get the script finished and get the rest of it all put together. So yeah, I'm excited about it. Who would have thought that somebody coming out of my background would have a movie made about him?
It's a blessing. It's a blessing. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on with us. Hang on, folks. I will be right back.
I'll write songs about the heartland. My heartland's in Tennessee.
Thank you for coming back. I hope you found that as amazing as I did. Now, the Heartland Journal News. 5 years without Rush. There aren't too many legends around, but he is a legend. And those people who listen to him every day, it was like a religious experience for a lot of people. Donald J. Trump, 17th February 2021. 5 years have passed since the Doctor of Democracy signed off for the final time. In February 21, when Rush Limbaugh succumbed to lung cancer, American conservatism lost more than its most recognizable voice. It lost the gravitational center that had held the movement's desperate factions in orbit for 3 decades. Today, as we mark half a decade without his booming baritone cutting through the afternoon airwaves, the right finds itself fractured into warring camps, each shouting past the other in an endless cacophony that Limbaugh, for all his provocations, once managed to harmonize into something resembling a coherent political philosophy. To understand what disappeared with Limbaugh, one must recall the theatrical audacity with which he approached the microphone. He entered his studio with the swagger of a performer who claimed to operate with half my brain tied behind my back, just to make it fair. It wasn't merely braggadocio, it was a framing device that elevated conservative talk radio into performance art. Limbaugh understood that politics was entertaining long before cable news hosts adopted the same ethos. He possessed what he humbly described as talent on loan from God, a phrase that served simultaneously as a joke, theological wink, and brand statement. Whether one viewed him as prophet or charlatan, there was no denying the alchemy quality of his delivery. He could make the fairness doctrine sound like tyranny, could transform the moderate Republican into an endangered species, could turn 3 hours of broadcasting into a daily congregation for millions who felt unheard by coastal elites. The doctor of democracy didn't just diagnose the nation's ills, he prescribed a specific kind of medicine, absolute certainty. In an era of squish moderates and country club Republicans, Limbaugh offered crystalline clarity. You're either with the movement or against it. This rigidity, which critics denounce as demagoguery and supporters celebrated as principled conviction, created a remarkable, durable coalition. From the Christian right to libertarian leaners, from blue-collar Reagan Democrats to anti-establishment populists, Limbaugh provided the soundtrack that made divergent interests feel like a unified front. His show was the town square where Pat Buchanan readers and Jack Kemp enthusiasts could find common ground in their mutual disdain for liberalism. But the microphone eventually went cold, and with it, the discipline it imposed. In the 5 years since, conservative media has metastasized into a fractured ecosystem of competing grievances. The fragmentation that began in Limbaugh's final years accelerated into full disillusion. Where once there existed a clear hierarchy, Rush at the apex with a constellation of local hosts and imitators orbiting below, there now reigns a civil war of voices. The populist nationalist wing dismisses the Reaganite remnants as conservative Inc. The establishment-aligned pundits dismiss the populist counterparts as dangerous demagogues, and both factions wage proxy wars through podcasts, Substack, and Twitter threads that Limbaugh, with his mastery of the long-form monologue, would have found chaotic and unproductive. The irony is stark. A movement that once prided itself on message discipline has become postmodern in its cacophony. Limbaugh could attack a Republican senator for insufficient loyalty without endangering the broader coalition because he alone provided that connective tissue. The current landscape lacks such synthesizing authority. When Matt Gaetz clashes with Mitch McConnell, when Matt Gaetz, when Tucker Carlson criticizes Mike Pence, when the Twitter right eviscerates the Wall Street Journal editorial bar, there is no rush to provide the final word. The doctor of democracy has left his patients to self-medicate, and the results have been toxic. What conservatives have discovered since 2021 is that Limbaugh was not merely a broadcaster, but a moderating institution. His show operated as a pressure release valve and organizing tool simultaneously. Today's right has the pressure without the release, the organizing without the tool. The talent on loan from God proved irreplaceable, not because of the talent itself, but because the ecosystem that created it, the fusion of AM radio, the post-Cold War consensus, and the personality-driven politics of the 90s no longer exists. 5 years on, the silence is telling. Conservatives aren't just failing to convert liberals, they're stopped listening to each other. The movement that once operated with the confidence of someone performing with half his brain tied behind his back now flails with the anxiety of a student who hasn't completed their reading. The golden microphone sits in its museum case, a relic of a time when one voice could drown out the noise. In its absence, there's only noise. And nobody, it seems, is making it fair anymore. Maybe you think I am. I hope so. That's it for this episode. Thank you, Mike Smith, for sharing your trials and tribulations with us and sharing the gospel with those hurting the most out there. God bless your ministry. God bless our troops. God bless anyone feeling there's no way out of your pain. There is always Jesus. And 988 is the suicide and crisis lifeline, like 411, only 988. You can call or text it. It received 16.5 million contacts since its launch in July 2022, including 11.1 million calls, 2.9 million texts, and 2.4 million chats. A lot of pain out there. Men account for a disproportionately high percentage of suicide deaths, often cited as around 75 to 80%. Nearly 72% of callers reported that calling the lifeline helped them a lot, and a further 26% said it helped them a little. 98%, it helps. I'm glad it's there. Would have been nice if it was there for Mike back before 2022. 988. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and pass it around. We only grow with your help, and still ad-free. Peace in our time, and glory to God.
Some testimonies are polished. This one isn't. This one was born in the gutter, where hope felt impossible, and survival was the only prayer left. This is a story of Mike Smith and the gutter gospel. Mike Smith didn't fall overnight. Addiction pulled him under. Bipolar disorder tore at his mind. Homelessness swallowed years of his life. And the world kept moving, as if he didn't exist. But even in the darkest places, God still speaks. And one night, in a dream, Jesus showed Mike a sea of tears, the hidden pain of the forgotten, the addicted, the broken. Growing up, Mike idolized his father, but life was unfair, and it took his father away from him at an early age. As a result, Mike was adrift, lost, caught up in alcohol and drugs, seeking something, anything. He enlisted in the Air Force, but his addictions followed, and soon he was discharged. His life began to spiral, and though he would marry and become a father, his torment with addictions worsened. He would find himself in hell, a padded room in an insane asylum. That moment didn't erase the past, but it ignited a future where grace wasn't just a word, it was a rescue mission. From a shelter to a home, from despair to purpose, from a life unraveling to a life today, a life of helping others, ministering to them, and sharing his story of salvation. Mike Smith's journey is a testament to grace that refuses to quit. Torn apart by addiction, mental illness, and years of homelessness, he discovered a God who meets people in the places everyone else overlooks. In this unfiltered, hope-drenched memoir, Smith reveals how a life shattered in the gutter can become a life rebuilt by the gospel. His story is a lifeline for the broken, a beacon for the forgotten, and a reminder that no one is beyond redemption.
It's a long way to Nashville from that Napa Valley vine. Put me on a road less traveled. Lord, now I know why. God knew I'd get there in His perfect time.
Heartland Journal Podcast is the media property of heartlandjournal.com, where you can find news stories, commentary, and content serving the heartland of America. Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of the people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.
Now I write songs about the heartland. My heartland's in Tennessee. Now I write songs about the heartland. My heartland's in Tennessee.